Welcome back, everybody. Today we're diving into a topic that might surprise you, the downsides of success. You guys send in some fascinating excerpts from Ego Part 2, Chi or 4.pdf. And let me tell you, the chapter title itself,
Oh, yeah.
Entitlement, Control, and Paranoia, really grabbed my attention. We're going to explore how success can actually lead to,
Right.
well, some pretty negative consequences. And more importantly, we're going to try to figure out how you can avoid these pitfalls in your own journey to success.
Yeah, it's true. The path to success often requires certain traits,
Mhm.
persistence, risk-taking, maybe even a bit of that. The ends justify the means mentality.
Hmm.
But what happens when those very traits,
Once
once helpful, turn into something detrimental? That's what
Yeah.
we're unpacking today.
Yeah, the source kicks off with this wild story about Xerxes, the emperor of Persia. Imagine this. He's leading this massive army across a bridge, and a storm comes and wipes out the bridge. His reaction: he orders the sea to be whipped 300 times. He even had his men brand the water with hot irons.
It seems almost comical, doesn't it? But this story really illustrates a key point. When we achieve a certain level of success, it can really distort our perception of control. We start to believe we can control anything and everything, even the forces of nature. And that can lead to some pretty irrational behavior. Have you ever noticed this in anyone you know?
Yeah, it makes you wonder, are these extreme reactions a symptom of the success itself? Or are there just personality traits that get magnified when someone gains power?
That's a great question. The source doesn't necessarily offer a definitive answer, but it does suggest that success can amplify pre-existing tendencies.
Right.
Think about it, the qualities that drive us to succeed, like ambition and a strong will, can easily morph into entitlement and control if we're not careful.
And speaking of entitlement, there's this quote from Bertrand Russell that really struck me. One of the symptoms of approaching nervous breakdown is the belief that one's work is terribly important. It seems like he's suggesting that success can inflate our ego
Mm.
to the point where we lose touch with reality.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the importance of our own work, especially when we're achieving great things. But it's crucial to maintain perspective. Remember, no one person's work is so important that it justifies neglecting our well-being or the well-being of those around us.
Right. It reminds me of that story about Ty Warner, the guy behind Beanie Babies. At the height of his success, he actually said, I could put the Ty Heart on manure and they'd buy it.
Right.
What do you make of that level of confidence?
It highlights the danger of overconfidence
Mhm.
and losing touch with reality. Success can create a bubble around us, and within that bubble, it's easy to believe we're invincible. But that kind of thinking can lead to bad decisions and ultimately a downfall.
So how do we guard against this? How do we achieve success without letting it go to our heads?
Well, the source dives into three major pitfalls we need to watch out for: entitlement, control, and paranoia. These aren't just abstract concepts, they have real-world consequences, and the first step to avoiding them is simply being aware of their existence.
Okay, so let's start with entitlement. What are some of the subtle ways this can manifest in our lives?
Entitlement isn't always about demanding special treatment
Hmm.
or acting superior. It can be much more subtle. For example, do you ever find yourself undervaluing other people's time? Maybe you constantly schedule last-minute meetings or expect people to be available at your beck and call. These are subtle forms of entitlement that can strain relationships and erode trust.
Yeah, it's like we start to believe that our time is somehow more valuable than everyone else's.
Exactly. And that can lead to a sense of resentment for those around us. We might not even realize we're doing it. But these seemingly small actions can have a big impact on our relationships and our overall well-being.
So what about control? I think we all have a certain desire for control in our lives. But when does it become a problem?
The source argues that the need for control often stems from a fear of losing the very things that brought us success. We become so accustomed to being in charge, to calling the shots, that we resist letting go. But this need for control can become exhausting, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us.
It makes you think of micromanagers, those bosses who have to have their hand in every single detail. It can be suffocating for the people who work for them.
And it's often counterproductive. When we try to control every aspect of a situation, we stifle creativity and innovation. We prevent others from taking ownership and developing their own skills.
So it seems like finding a balance is key. How do we maintain a healthy sense of control without becoming tyrants?
That's where delegation and trust come in. As we progress in our careers and achieve greater success, it becomes essential to learn to delegate effectively and to trust the people we work with. This not only frees up our time and energy, but also empowers others to grow and contribute their unique talents.
Makes sense. All right, let's move on to the third pitfall. Paranoia. What are some of the red flags that we might be falling into this trap?
Paranoia can manifest in many ways, but it often starts with a feeling of distrust or suspicion. We might start to see threats where none exist, or assume that others are working against us.
And that can lead to a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The more suspicious we become, the more we isolate ourselves and push others away, which only reinforces our paranoia.
Precisely. And the source suggests that paranoia is often fueled by success itself. The higher we climb, the more we have to lose. And that fear of losing everything we've worked for can trigger a hypervigilance that quickly spirals into paranoia.
It's almost like we become prisoners of our own success, constantly looking over our shoulders, worried that someone's going to take it all away.
That's a great way to put it. And that kind of mindset can be incredibly damaging. It can prevent us from taking risks, from forming genuine connections, and ultimately, from enjoying the fruits of our labor.
So how do we break free from this cycle of paranoia?
The source emphasizes the importance of self-awareness and seeking outside perspectives. We need to be able to recognize the signs of paranoia in ourselves and be willing to reach out to trusted friends, family members, or mentors for support.
It's like we need to build a support system that can help us stay grounded and maintain a healthy perspective, even when we're feeling overwhelmed by success.
Exactly. Surrounding ourselves with people who will challenge our assumptions and offer honest feedback is crucial for avoiding the pitfalls of paranoia and maintaining a balanced view of ourselves and the world around us.
That's great advice. But what about those times when our paranoia stems from real threats or betrayals? How do we know when our suspicions are justified?
That's where discernment and critical thinking come in. We need to be able to evaluate the evidence objectively and avoid jumping to conclusions. It's also important to remember that not everyone is out to get us. Just because we've achieved success doesn't mean that everyone around us is envious or plotting our downfall.
So it seems like finding that balance between trust and healthy skepticism is key. We don't want to be naive and ignore potential threats, but we also don't want to let suspicion and fear rule our lives.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about finding that sweet spot where we can be both discerning and open-minded, cautious but not consumed by fear. And that's a skill that takes practice and self-reflection.
Well, speaking of historical figures, the source shares this interesting anecdote about Benjamin Franklin and his unsent letter to Arthur Lee. Lee was an American diplomat during the Revolutionary War, and he was known for being incredibly difficult to work with.
Oh, wow.
Being the wise and diplomatic man he was, wrote Lee a letter warning him about the dangers of his unchecked temper. He even went so far as to say that it could lead to insanity.
Wow.
But what's fascinating is that Franklin ultimately decided not to send the letter. He felt that the act of writing it out had served its purpose, and he didn't want to risk further alienating Lee.
That's interesting.
What do you make of that?
I think it highlights a few key points. Firstly, it shows the power of self-reflection and emotional regulation. Franklin recognized his own frustration with Lee and chose to channel it in a constructive way, rather than lashing out or engaging in a destructive conflict.
Right. It also suggests that sometimes the best course of action is to simply step back and observe, rather than trying to control or change someone else's behavior.
Exactly. We can't force others to change, but we can control our own reactions and choose how we engage with them. And sometimes the wisest choice is to simply disengage.
This brings to mind another historical figure, Richard Nixon. The source actually uses Nixon's infamous Oval Office tapes as an example of how paranoia can manifest at the highest levels of power.
Oh yeah, those tapes. They offer a chilling glimpse into Nixon's mindset. You can hear the suspicion, the distrust, the constant fear of betrayal. It's a stark reminder of how paranoia can warp perception and lead to disastrous decision-making.
It's like he created an echo chamber around himself, surrounding himself with people who only reinforce his own biases and fears. And that's a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. It underscores the importance of surrounding ourselves with people who will challenge our assumptions, offer different perspectives, and help us stay grounded in reality.
It's a reminder that even the most powerful people are not immune to the pitfalls of success. In fact, it seems like the higher we climb, the more vulnerable we become.
That's a powerful insight. It challenges the notion that success equates to invulnerability. It reminds us that we are all human, regardless of our achievements, and that we're all susceptible to the same psychological traps.
Okay, well, to lighten the mood a bit, the source shares this witty quote from General Winfield Scott, who had a rather contentious relationship with Jefferson Davis. After being bombarded with what he perceived as petty demands from Davis, Scott finally snapped back, Compassion is always due to an enraged imbecile who lays about him in blows which hurt only himself.
Ouch, it's a humorous anecdote, but it speaks to a profound truth. When we become consumed by the need for control, when we lash out at every perceived slight, we ultimately harm ourselves more than anyone else.
It's like we're boxing with shadows, expending all our energy fighting imaginary enemies, while neglecting the real work that needs to be done.
Exactly. And that misplaced focus can have disastrous consequences, both for our personal well-being and for our professional success.
The source also touches on Napoleon's manipulative tendencies, highlighting his belief that he could bend anyone to his will. It paints a picture of someone so consumed by ambition that he loses sight of basic human decency. What are your thoughts on this?
It brings up a crucial point, the danger of objectifying others. When we start viewing people as pawns in our game, as tools to be used for our own advancement, we've already begun to stray from the path of true success.
It's like we're dehumanizing the very people who could help us achieve our goals. And that's a recipe for resentment, betrayal, and ultimately loneliness.
You're absolutely right. True success is not just about achieving our own goals. It's about building meaningful relationships, fostering collaboration, and creating a positive impact on the world around us.
So it seems like a recurring theme here is the importance of self-awareness, wouldn't you say?
Without a doubt. The source emphasizes that a truly successful person must consistently remind themselves of the limits of their power and reach. It's about cultivating humility, recognizing that success is often a combination of factors, not just our own brilliance or hard work.
That's a really important point. It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking we're solely responsible for our achievements. But there are always countless people and circumstances that contribute to our success. We need to acknowledge and appreciate those contributions.
Absolutely. And that acknowledgement fosters gratitude, which is a powerful antidote to entitlement and arrogance.
So as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive into the perils of success, I think it's safe to say that self-awareness is paramount. We need to be aware of our own tendencies, both positive and negative, and we need to be willing to seek outside perspectives to help us stay grounded and on track.
I couldn't agree more. Self-awareness is the foundation upon which all other virtues are built. It's the key to recognizing our strengths, mitigating our weaknesses, and ultimately achieving a success that is both sustainable and fulfilling.
And building on that foundation of self-awareness, I think it's important to delve a little deeper into the specific dangers of each of these pitfalls we've been discussing. Let's revisit entitlement. It's not always about those extravagant demands or a blatant sense of superiority, as we touched upon earlier. It can show up in much more subtle ways, like consistently undervaluing other people's time.
You're right. It's easy to fall into that trap. When you're busy and focused on your own goals, you can feel like every minute counts. And it's tempting to squeeze in as much as possible, even if it means inconveniencing others, and that's where the trouble starts. The source emphasizes that even small transgressions, like scheduling back-to-back meetings without breaks, or expecting immediate responses to emails regardless of the time of day, can create a ripple effect of resentment and burnout, not just for others, but for ourselves as well.
That makes me think about the concept of emotional labor, the unseen effort we put into managing our emotions and interactions with others. If we're constantly demanding and disregarding the needs of those around us, it creates a huge emotional burden for everyone involved.
That's a brilliant connection, and it highlights the interconnectedness of these pitfalls. Entitlement can breed resentment, which can then fuel our need for control, creating a vicious cycle.
So how do we break that cycle? If we recognize these tendencies in ourselves, what are some practical steps we can take to course correct?
One strategy the source suggests is to actively cultivate a sense of gratitude. When we feel grateful for the contributions of others, it becomes much harder to take them for granted.
I like that. Instead of focusing on what we need or what we're entitled to, we shift our focus to appreciating what we already have and what others are doing for us.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective can have a profound impact on our relationships and our overall well-being.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about control. I think it's safe to say that most successful people have a strong desire for control. It's often what drives them to achieve great things. But as we've discussed, this drive can become detrimental if it's not kept in check.
Absolutely. The source argues that this need for control often stems from a fear of losing the very things that brought us success in the first place. We become so used to being in charge, to calling the shots, that we resist letting go, even when it's necessary.
It's like we're clinging to the reins for dear life, afraid that if we loosen our grip, everything will fall apart.
And that fear can be paralyzing. It can prevent us from delegating effectively, from trusting others,
Yeah.
and ultimately from scaling our success.
It's funny because it seems counterintuitive. You'd think that someone who's achieved great success would be more confident in their abilities and therefore more willing to let go of control, but it often seems to be the opposite.
That's a really interesting observation, and I think it speaks to the insidious nature of these pitfalls. Success, in a way, can become its own trap. The more we achieve,
Hmm.
the more we have to lose, and that can make us even more risk-averse and controlling.
So how do we loosen our grip without feeling like we're losing control altogether? How do we find that balance?
The source suggests that it all comes down to trust. We need to learn to trust ourselves, trust our abilities, and trust the people we work with.
That's easier said than done, especially for those who have a history of micromanaging or who have been burned by trusting the wrong people in the past.
I hear you. It's a process, and it takes time and conscious effort. One strategy that can be helpful is to start small. Delegate a task that's relatively low risk and see how it goes.
It's about building that muscle of trust, gradually expanding our comfort zone, and recognizing that we don't have to do everything ourselves.
Exactly. And as we delegate and empower others, we often find that they rise to the occasion. Not only does this free up our time and energy, but it also fosters a more collaborative and fulfilling work environment.
And that brings us to paranoia. I think this one can be particularly tricky because it often masquerades as prudence or careful planning. It's easy to rationalize our suspicions and anxieties as simply being realistic or prepared.
That's a great point. And the source acknowledges that there's a fine line between healthy skepticism and crippling paranoia. The key is to be able to differentiate between the two.
So how do we do that? How do we know if our suspicions are justified or if we're spiraling into paranoia?
One way is to ask ourselves, is there concrete evidence to support my fears? Or am I basing my suspicions on assumptions or gut feelings? It's also helpful to consider the source of our information.
Are we getting caught up in rumors or gossip? Or are we relying on credible sources?
Exactly. It's easy to get swept up in a whirlwind of speculation and fear-mongering, especially in today's hyper-connected world.
And let's not forget the role of social media. It can be a breeding ground for paranoia, amplifying our anxieties and feeding our fears. It's important to be mindful of how much we're consuming and to make sure we're getting information from reliable sources.
You've hit the nail on the head. We need to be critical consumers of information, filtering out the noise and focusing on what's truly relevant and credible.
And I think it's also crucial to remember that not everyone is out to get us. Just because we've achieved success doesn't mean that everyone is envious or plotting our downfall. In fact, most people are probably too busy with their own lives to even notice what we're doing.
That's a great reminder. It's easy to fall into that trap of thinking we're the center of the universe. But the truth is, most people are more concerned with their own problems and aspirations than with ours.
So how do we cultivate a healthy sense of trust without becoming naive or vulnerable?
The source suggests that it's about finding a balance between trust and discernment. We can be open to collaboration and connection without blindly trusting everyone we meet. It's about listening to our intuition, being aware of red flags, and setting healthy boundaries.
It's like that old saying, trust but verify. We can extend trust, but we also need to be wise and discerning in our choices.
Exactly. And that wisdom comes from experience, from learning from our mistakes, and from being willing to adjust our approach as we go.
I'm curious, what about the flip side of paranoia? The tendency to dismiss legitimate concerns or threats as just being paranoid. How do we avoid falling into that trap?
That's a great question. And it highlights the importance of being able to hold multiple perspectives at once. We can acknowledge our own tendency towards paranoia without dismissing the possibility that our concerns might be valid.
So it's about being open to both possibilities, that we might be overreacting, and that there might be a genuine threat. And then we can gather information and make a decision based on the evidence.
You've got it. It's about staying grounded, being rational, and not letting our emotions cloud our judgment.
And I think it's also important to surround ourselves with people who will challenge our assumptions and offer honest feedback, even if it's not what we want to hear.
Absolutely. We need people in our lives who will call us out when we're being irrational or self-destructive, who will help us see things from a different perspective.
Speaking of historical figures, the source shares an interesting anecdote about Benjamin Franklin and his unsent letter to Arthur Lee. Lee was an American diplomat during the Revolutionary War, and he was known for being incredibly difficult to work with. Franklin, being the wise and diplomatic man he was, actually wrote a letter to Lee, warning him about the dangers of his unchecked temper.
He did.
He even went so far as to say that it could lead to insanity.
Wow, that's pretty bold.
But here's the twist. Franklin ultimately decided not to send the letter. He felt that simply writing it out had served its purpose, and he didn't want to risk further alienating Lee. What do you make of that decision?
I think it speaks volumes about Franklin's emotional intelligence
Hmm.
and his understanding of human nature. He recognized that sometimes. The most effective approach is to simply step back, observe, and let things unfold naturally.
It's like he was channeling that Stoic philosophy
Yeah.
of accepting what we can't control and focusing on what we can.
Exactly. And sometimes what we can control is our own reaction to a situation rather than the situation itself.
Yeah. It's a powerful reminder that we don't always have to engage in every battle, especially when those battles are likely to be futile or even counterproductive.
You're absolutely right. Sometimes the wisest course of action is to simply disengage, to conserve our energy for the things that truly matter and that we can actually influence.
This brings to mind another historical figure who struggled with paranoia, Richard Nixon. The source uses Nixon's infamous Oval Office tapes as an example of how paranoia can manifest at the highest levels of power.
Oh, yeah. Those tapes offer a chilling glimpse into Nixon's mindset. You can hear the suspicion, the distrust, the constant fear of betrayal. It's a stark reminder of how paranoia can warp perception and lead to disastrous decision-making, even for someone in such a powerful position.
It's like he created an echo chamber around himself, surrounding himself with people who only reinforce his own biases and fears. And that's a recipe for disaster, no matter who you are.
Absolutely. It highlights the importance of having a diverse range of voices and perspectives around us, people who will challenge our assumptions and help us to ground it in reality.
It's a reminder that even the most brilliant and successful people are not immune to the pitfalls of human psychology. We all need support systems. We all need people we can trust to tell us the truth, even when it's difficult to hear.
I couldn't agree more. And building those support systems takes time and effort. It requires us to be vulnerable, to be open to feedback, and to be willing to admit when we're wrong.
So it seems like humility is a key ingredient in navigating the complexities of success.
Without a doubt. Humility allows us to acknowledge our limitations, to learn from our mistakes, and to remain open to growth and change. And that, in turn, makes us more resilient, more adaptable, and ultimately more successful in the long run.
Well said. And speaking of humility, I think it's time to revisit that witty quote from General Winfield Scott, who, as you'll recall, had a rather tumultuous relationship with Jefferson Davis. After being bombarded with what he perceived as petty demands from Davis, Scott famously quipped, "Compassion is always due to an enraged imbecile who lays about him in blows which hurt only himself."
It's a humorous anecdote, but it speaks to a profound truth about the nature of control. When we become consumed by the need to control every situation, when we lash out at every perceived slight, we ultimately harm ourselves more than anyone else.
It's like we're exhausting ourselves fighting imaginary enemies while neglecting the real work that needs to be done.
Exactly. And that misplaced focus can have disastrous consequences, both for our personal well-being and for our professional success.
It reminds me of that image of Don Quixote tilting at windmills. It's a classic example of misdirected energy and misplaced aggression.
You've hit the nail on the head. And just like Don Quixote, we can end up looking foolish and causing more harm than good when we fail to recognize the difference between real threats and imagined ones.
The source also touches on Napoleon's manipulative tendencies, highlighting his belief that he could bend anyone to his will. It paints a picture of someone so consumed by ambition that he loses sight of basic human decency. What are your thoughts on this?
It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of objectifying others. When we start viewing people as pawns in our game, as tools to be used for our own advancement, we've already begun to stray from the path of true success.
It's like we're dehumanizing the very people who could help us achieve our goals, and that's a surefire way to create resentment, distrust, and ultimately loneliness.
You're absolutely right. True success is not just about achieving our own goals. It's about building meaningful relationships, fostering collaboration, and creating a positive impact on the world around us.
So it seems like a recurring theme here is the importance of treating others with respect and recognizing their inherent value, regardless of their position or their perceived usefulness to us.
Without a doubt. And that respect stems from a fundamental belief in the interconnectedness of all things. We are all part of a larger web of relationships, and our actions have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves.
It's a reminder that success is not a zero-sum game. We can achieve our goals without exploiting others or diminishing their worth. In fact, true success is often achieved through collaboration, cooperation, and mutual respect.
Couldn't agree more. And that kind of success is not only more sustainable, but also more fulfilling in the long run. It creates a positive feedback loop, fostering trust, loyalty, and a shared sense of purpose.
And speaking of feedback loops, I think it's important to loop back to that concept of self-awareness that we discussed earlier. It seems like self-awareness is the foundation, on which all these other virtues are built.
Absolutely. Self-awareness is the key to recognizing our strengths, acknowledging our weaknesses, and making conscious choices about how we want to navigate the complexities of success.
It's like having a compass that helps us stay on course, even when we're surrounded by distractions and temptation.
Exactly, and just like a compass, our self-awareness needs to be calibrated regularly. We need to take the time to reflect on our experiences, to learn from our mistakes, and to make adjustments as needed.
So it seems like self-reflection is a crucial practice for anyone who wants to achieve lasting success without falling prey to the pitfalls we've been discussing.
You've hit the nail on the head. Self-reflection allows us to step outside ourselves, to observe our thoughts and behaviors with a critical eye, and to identify patterns that might be holding us back.
It's like having an internal coach who can help us see our blind spots and challenge us to be our best selves.
That's a great analogy. And just like a good coach, our self-reflection should be. Our self-reflection should be both supportive and challenging. It should encourage us to acknowledge our strengths, while also pushing us to confront our weaknesses and to strive for continuous improvement.
So what are some practical tips for cultivating a regular practice of self-reflection?
The source suggests a few simple but powerful techniques. One is to keep a journal, where you can write down your thoughts and feelings, track your progress, and identify areas where you'd like to grow.
I like that. Journaling can be a great way to process our experiences, to gain clarity on our goals, and to track our emotional patterns.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be a formal, structured practice. Even just a few minutes of free writing each day can be incredibly insightful.
Another technique the source mentions is mindfulness meditation. How can that be helpful in this context?
Mindfulness meditation is all about cultivating awareness of the present moment, noticing our thoughts and feelings without judgment.
It's like hitting the pause button on the constant chatter in our minds, giving us a chance to observe our inner landscape with more objectivity.
Exactly. And that objectivity can be incredibly powerful. It allows us to detach from our thoughts and emotions, to see them as simply passing phenomena rather than as fixed realities.
And that detachment can help us break free from those negative thought patterns that can lead to entitlement, control, and paranoia.
You've got it. It's about creating space between our thoughts and our actions, allowing us to make conscious choices rather than reacting impulsively.
So it seems like self-reflection, whether through journaling, meditation, or simply taking some quiet time for introspection, is a crucial tool for anyone who wants to navigate the complexities of success without losing themselves in the process.
I couldn't agree more. It's about cultivating a deep understanding of ourselves, our motivations, our strengths, and our weaknesses. And that understanding is the foundation upon which we can build a life of purpose, meaning, and lasting fulfillment.
And speaking of lasting fulfillment, I think it's important to acknowledge that success is not a destination. It's a journey. And like any journey, there will be ups and downs, twists and turns, and unexpected challenges along the way.
That's a great point. And the source emphasizes that it's those challenges, those moments of adversity, that ultimately shape us and define who we become.
So it's not about avoiding challenges altogether, but about learning how to navigate them effectively, to extract the lessons they offer, and to emerge from them stronger and wiser.
Exactly. Resilience, the ability to bounce back from setbacks, is an essential quality for anyone who wants to achieve lasting success. And that resilience is built through experience, through facing our fears, and through learning from our mistakes.
It's about embracing the journey with all its imperfections and uncertainties, knowing that it's those very imperfections that make it unique and worthwhile.
You've captured it perfectly. It's about finding joy in the process, appreciating the small victories along the way, and recognizing that true fulfillment comes not just from achieving our goals, but from the growth and transformation we experience along the journey.
And that brings us to a crucial question. How do we measure success? If it's not just about achieving our goals, then what are the metrics that matter most?
That's a question that each individual must answer for themselves. There's no one-size-fits-all definition of success, but the source offers a few guiding principles that can help us define success on our own terms.
I'm all ears. What are those guiding principles?
First and foremost, the source emphasizes the importance of aligning our goals with our values. If we're pursuing goals that are not in alignment with our core values, We're likely to feel unfulfilled, even if we achieve them.
So it's about asking ourselves, what do I truly care about? What kind of impact do I want to make on the world? And then ensuring that our goals are in service to those values.
Exactly. Our values are our internal compass, guiding us towards a life that is both meaningful and fulfilling.
And what are some other guiding principles?
The source also highlights the importance of balance. True success encompasses all areas of our lives: our relationships, our health, our personal growth, our contributions to the community.
It's about finding that sweet spot where all these different facets of our lives are working in harmony rather than neglecting one area in pursuit of another.
You've got it. It's about creating a life that is both fulfilling and sustainable, where we're not sacrificing our well-being or our relationships on the altar of achievement.
And I think it's also important to remember that success is not a static state. It's an ongoing process of growth, evolution, and adaptation.
Absolutely. The journey never truly ends. There's always room for improvement, always new challenges to overcome, always new opportunities for growth.
So it's not about reaching some mythical finish line, but about embracing the ongoing journey with all its ups and downs, knowing that it's the journey itself that matters most.
You've captured it beautifully. It's about finding joy in the process, appreciating the small victories along the way, and recognizing that true fulfillment comes not just from achieving our goals, but from the growth and transformation we experience along the way.
And that brings us to another crucial question. How do we deal with setbacks and failures? Because let's face it, no matter how successful we are, we're all going to experience setbacks and failures at some point.
That's a great point. And the source emphasizes that it's those setbacks and failures, those moments of adversity, that ultimately shape us and define who we become.
So it's not about avoiding challenges altogether, but about learning how to navigate them effectively, to extract the lessons they offer, and to emerge from them stronger and wiser.
Exactly. Resilience, the ability to bounce back from setbacks, is an essential quality for anyone who wants to achieve lasting success. And that resilience is built through experience, through facing our fears, and through learning from our mistakes.
It's about embracing the journey with all its imperfections and uncertainties, knowing that it's those very imperfections that make it unique and worthwhile.
You've captured it perfectly. It's about finding joy in the process, appreciating the small victories along the way, and recognizing that true fulfillment comes not just from achieving our goals, but from the growth and transformation we experience along the way.
Well, speaking of growth and transformation, I think it's time to shift gears and explore another crucial aspect of success: relationships.
Excellent point. Relationships are often overlooked in conversations about success, but they are absolutely essential.
I couldn't agree more. After all, we don't achieve success in a vacuum. We achieve it within a web of relationships, with our colleagues, our mentors, our friends, our families.
Exactly. And those relationships provide support, encouragement, accountability, and perspective. They help us stay grounded, they challenge us to grow, and they celebrate our successes with us.
So how do we cultivate strong, supportive relationships that contribute to our success?
The source suggests that it starts with authenticity. Being genuine, being ourselves, is the foundation upon which all strong relationships are built.
It's about showing up as our true selves, without pretense or masks, and allowing others to do the same.
Exactly. And that vulnerability creates a space for genuine connection, for trust to develop, and for intimacy to flourish.
And I think it's also about being present, truly listening to others, being fully engaged in the conversation, and showing that we genuinely care about what they have to say.
Absolutely. Presence is a powerful gift we can give to others. It conveys respect,
Yeah.
it deepens connection, and it fosters a sense of shared understanding.
And speaking of shared understanding, I think it's important to acknowledge that conflict is inevitable in any relationship. How do we navigate conflict in a way that strengthens the relationship rather than weakens it?
That's a great question. And the source offers a few key insights. Firstly, it emphasizes the importance of clear communication. Being able to articulate our needs and feelings clearly and respectfully is essential for resolving conflict constructively.
It's about avoiding blame, accusations, and personal attacks, and instead focusing on the issue at hand and finding a solution that works for everyone involved.
Exactly. It's also important to be willing to compromise, recognizing that we don't always have to get our way, and that there's often a middle ground that can satisfy everyone's needs.
And I think it's also about choosing our battles wisely. Not every disagreement needs to be a fight. Sometimes it's better to simply let things go, especially if the issue is minor or not worth the emotional energy.
You're absolutely right. It's about discerning what's truly important and focusing our energy on those issues that matter most.
And I think it's also about being willing to forgive. Holding on to grudges or resentment only poisons the relationship and prevents us from moving forward.
Forgiveness is a powerful act of healing, both for ourselves and for the relationship. It's about releasing the negative emotions and choosing to see the other person with compassion and understanding.
And sometimes, forgiveness means letting go of the relationship altogether. Not every relationship is meant to last forever. And sometimes, the healthiest choice is to move on.
You're right. And that can be a difficult decision. But it's important to remember that we deserve to be in relationships that are supportive, loving, and respectful. If a relationship is causing us more pain than joy, it might be time to reevaluate its place in our lives.
So it seems like cultivating strong, healthy relationships is a crucial aspect of success, both personally and professionally. It's about being authentic, being present, communicating effectively, navigating conflict constructively, and choosing to be in relationships that nourish our souls.
Beautifully said. Relationships are the foundation upon which we build our lives, and they are essential for our happiness, our well-being, and our ultimate success.
And speaking of foundations, I think it's time to revisit that concept of humility that we touched upon earlier. It seems like humility is a recurring theme in our discussion of success.
Absolutely. Humility is an essential quality for anyone who wants to achieve lasting success, without falling prey to the pitfalls we've been discussing.
So what exactly is humility? How do we define it?
The source defines humility as the ability to see ourselves accurately, without inflating or deflating our importance. It's about recognizing our strengths and weaknesses, our accomplishments and failures, without letting them define our worth.
It's about having a realistic assessment of ourselves, both our positive and negative qualities, and being able to hold both in balance.
And being able to hold both in balance.
Right. Humility is not about putting ourselves down or denying our accomplishments. It's about recognizing that we are both capable and flawed, worthy and imperfect.
And I think it's also about recognizing that we don't have all the answers, that we can learn from others, even those who might seem less experienced or knowledgeable than ourselves.
You've hit the nail on the head. Humility is about being open to learning, to growth, and to new perspectives. It's about recognizing that we are all works in progress and that there's always more to learn and discover. So how do we cultivate humility? It seems like it's a quality that's often misunderstood or even undervalued in our culture, which often celebrates arrogance and self-promotion.
That's true. Humility can be a challenging quality to cultivate, especially in a society that often equates self-worth with achievement and status. But it's a quality that's essential for lasting success and fulfillment.
So what are some practical tips for cultivating humility?
The source suggests a few simple but powerful practices. One is to practice gratitude. When we focus on what we're grateful for, it's harder to get caught up in our own ego and accomplishments.
It's like shifting our perspective from what do I deserve to what am I thankful for?
Exactly. And that shift in perspective can have a profound impact on our mindset and our overall well-being.
What are some other practices that can help us cultivate humility?
The source also highlights the importance of seeking feedback from others. It's easy to get caught up in our own perspective and lose sight of how our actions might be impacting others.
So it's about being willing to ask for feedback, to listen to it with an open mind, and to use it as an opportunity for growth and self-improvement.
You've got it. Feedback, both positive and negative, can be an invaluable tool for self-awareness and growth.
And I think it's also important to remember that we don't have to be perfect. In fact, embracing our imperfections can actually be a source of strength and authenticity.
I agree. Perfectionism can be a trap, leading to anxiety, self-doubt, and a fear of failure. Embracing our imperfections, on the other hand, allows us to be more compassionate towards ourselves and others, and it opens us up to the possibility of growth and transformation.
So it seems like humility is not about denying our strengths or accomplishments, but about recognizing that we are all works in progress, that we all make mistakes, and that we all have room for growth.
Beautifully said. Humility is about embracing our humanity with all its complexities and contradictions. And it's that embrace that ultimately allows us to live a life that is both authentic and fulfilling.
Well said. And I think that's a great note to end on for this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring the pitfalls of success, the importance of self-awareness, the power of relationships, and the essential quality of humility.
It's been a rich and insightful conversation, and I hope it's given our listeners some food for thought as they navigate their own journeys to success.
That's right. And remember, everybody, success is not a destination, it's a journey. And like any journey, there will be bumps in the road. But it's how we navigate those bumps that truly defines who we are. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the unexpected side of success. We'll see you next time for another insightful exploration.